welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
So today we're plunging into really a fascinating collection of sources. We've got articles, research, even some striking personal notes.
Yeah, and they offer this behind-the-scenes look at the challenges around President Biden's 2024 re-election campaign.
Exactly. And specifically, we're zeroing in on those concerns about his age, about fitness for office.
And crucially, these aren't just coming from opponents. According to these sources, these concerns were voiced from within his own party, even his own administration.
Right. That's the key part here.
So our mission, really, with this deep dive, it's to unpack these specific sources.
Pull out the most significant insights.
Exactly. Understand the dynamics they describe, especially in that crucial lead-up to the June 2024 debate.
Okay. So it's about getting quickly informed on what this, particular stack of material reveals about that really intense political period.
So where do we start digging in?
Well, the sources really seem to open with the perspective of someone who apparently saw these issues quite early on, Congressman Dean Phillips.
They do. Phillips, he comes from a family with a bit of a history of, let's say, giving advice. And he certainly had he wanted Democrats to hear.
Okay.
He observed throughout 2023 what he described as a clear, visible decline in President Biden's speaking and walking skills.
Yeah.
To him, it suggested, potential cognitive issues. But his fellow Democrats, in his words, detailed right here in the sources, they were in deep denial.
Deep denial. That's a strong phrase.
It is.
And when Phillips pressed them on what he saw as Biden's decline, he often hit this wall, right, what he called the yes, but response.
Exactly, that argument. Yes, maybe there are concerns about Biden, but Trump winning, we can't have that.
Which, Phillips apparently argued, was precisely why Trump could win.
Yeah.
Because Biden was the nominee.
Right, so these sources describe him taking it upon himself, really, to try and spark a competitive primary.
And this wasn't new for him. He talked about this before.
Apparently, way back in July 2022, he'd already commented on the radio that the country would be, quote, well-served by a new generation of compelling, well-prepared, dynamic Democrats.
So he saw it as his mission to enlist competitors.
Yeah, the sources detail his attempts, reaching out directly to governors like J.B. Pritzker, Gretchen Whitmer.
And they just declined his calls. Even people like Whitmer and Pritzker.
According to these sources, yes, didn't take the call, and Phillips even considered running himself if nobody else stepped up.
Wow. Okay, so, but before he went public with all this, he tried to give a heads up to House Leader Hakeem Jeffries and the White House.
He did, and their reaction, as described in these notes, well, it was swift and pretty intense.
Oh, intense.
White House Chief of Staff Jeff Zients reportedly called what Phillips was about to do insane. Phillips wanted to talk to Biden directly, but nope, that wasn't going to happen.
Insane. So the pushback was immediate.
Yeah.
And right for the top levels.
Then Phillips went public, meet the press, August 2023.
Right, calling for Biden to pass the torch. And he made it clear he admired Biden, but felt it was time.
Yes, and he even brought up the names Chuck Todd mentioned, those moderate governors like Whitmer, Walz, Evers, Pritzker, Shapiro, as potential alternatives.
And crucially, he mentioned something about institutional fear.
He did, that some people he'd spoken to didn't want to be named publicly because of this institutional fear.
That tells you a lot about the climate, doesn't it?
It really does. And this whole thing positioned Phillips as, well, an irritant, a burr under the Democratic saddle, as one source put it.
To the point where he tried to resign from his leadership role.
Yeah, in September 2023, initially, Jeffries refused it.
But that changed.
It did. After Congresswoman Sidney Kamlager-Dove reportedly questioned, how one member could hold such incongruent views with the rest of the leadership, Jeffries accepted his resignation.
Okay, this really paints a picture, doesn't it? How the party apparatus reacted to internal dissent on this specific issue.
And the sources reveal something else interesting. The DNC, the Democratic National Committee, they actually had discussions back in late 2022 about preparing for a primary.
Really? Like debates, setting up a system.
Exactly. But those talks apparently ended abruptly, right after Jen O'Malley Dillon made it clear Biden was running. Full stop.
So that was the signal.
According to these materials, yes. That was the signal for the establishment effort to basically exclude challengers, pushing the boundaries of standard practice, maybe, to do so.
Like the controversial primary calendar change.
Yeah.
Biden unilaterally making South Carolina the first contest.
Precisely. The sources say this decision just stunned party leaders, people like Jim Clyburn, Jamie Harrison. They hadn't even asked for it.
And Clyburn later admitted why.
Reportedly, yes. Admitted it was done explicitly to protect Biden from potential embarrassment in early states.
But the public reason given was different, right? About uplifting black voters.
That was the public framing, yes. Suggesting critics were undermining black voters, maybe even racist.
But what did the sources say about the real motivation behind closed doors?
They're pretty clear. While that was the message out front, the internal White House and DNC view, acknowledged privately, was simpler. The main motivation was just helping Joe Biden win.
And part of that was no debates.
Explicitly, the DNC stated there would be no party-sanctioned debates, despite challengers like RFK Jr. and Marianne Williamson asking for them.
And Phillips himself faced real roadblocks just getting on ballots.
Oh, yeah, like in Wisconsin. The state Democratic Party initially refused to recognize him. He had to sue, all the way to the state Supreme Court.
Which eventually ruled he should be on the ballot.
Yes, giving him a path, though a very difficult one. Phillips himself stated his reason for running, to force a debate, to expose his belief that Biden was, quote, not up for another term.
But he couldn't get Biden on a stage. And the sources highlight that the entire party apparatus just seemed to go along with that, prevent it.
Right. So after Super Tuesday, Phillips suspended his campaign, endorsed Biden. But the sources capture his feeling, his deep concern, that the party was sleepwalking toward disaster.
Meanwhile, you had this other perspective inside the White House, what some sources called the Politburo.
Yes, this group, according to the sources, they dismissed concerns, like about how Biden looked walking. They argued his gait had absolutely nothing to do with presidential fitness.
And Mike Donilon, a key advisor, he reportedly argued something else.
His argument, as described here, was, if Biden were truly weak, credible candidates, Newsom, Whitmer, Pritzker, Klobuchar, they would have challenged him, like it happened in past primaries.
Since they didn't challenge.
Donilon's conclusion, according to the sources, Biden wasn't weak. He even dismissed negative polling, arguing it hadn't changed much since Afghanistan and was always weak. The plan was to revisit this after the June debate.
Okay, so you look at all this Phillips' early warnings, the institutional fear, the party actively working to protect the incumbent. What does this tell you about political dynamics when these questions about a leader's fitness come up?
Well, it seems like the sheer scale of the potential problem the leader's fitness combined with maybe institutional inertia and certainly fear of the alternative, Trump, it created the situation where dissent, even informed dissent from within, was just quickly sidelined, actively suppressed, even as these sources describe.
And what's fascinating here, as you mentioned, is how those concerns weren't just limited to outsiders like Phillips.
Exactly. The sources describe growing worries bubbling up within the administration, within the party orbit itself.
Like among White House staffers. They reportedly split into different camps.
3 distinct groups, according to these sources. First, you have that Politburo group we mentioned.
Right. They seem convinced that the alarming issues they might have seen, maybe the stumbles, the verbal slips, were just, quote, performative parts of the job, not the real substance.
Yeah, arguing that decisions made behind closed doors were what truly mattered. And Mike Donilon fits here, holding the view, according to the sources, that Biden was still pretty damn smart on complex issues, despite any observable memory lapses or public gaffes.
Okay, so that's group 1. Dismiss the outward signs. What about group 2?
The second group, as described here, they acknowledge communications problems, but they genuinely believed the decision-making was solid.
But they still worried about the communication part.
Yes, because they took those performative aspects, speaking clearly, being sharp off the cuff seriously. They saw them as integral to modern leadership, so any deficits there were a real concern for this group.
And then the third group.
This group, according to these sources, was seriously concerned about decline, just flat out worried. And reportedly angry at the first group, the Politburo, for what they saw as denial.
Feeling it was a deep disservice.
That's the phrase used in the source material, a deep disservice to the country and actually to the president himself.
Wow. That's quite a stark division inside the White House staff. But it wasn't just staff, right? The sources mentioned Democratic senators noticing changes, too.
They do. Even longtime personal friends in the Senate, a place where one source joked you needed a minor in geriatrics to navigate the Turek, they reportedly noticed a change.
What kind of change?
A considerable change. A marked decline in Biden's speaking and movement, specifically in private meetings in early 2024.
Even personal friends noticed that much. Were they saying anything?
The sources indicate they were worried, yeah. but largely kept silent, giving him the benefit of the doubt partly because, well, he expressed confidence he could beat Trump.
And access to the president himself seemed to be shrinking, according to these notes.
Yes, that's a key point in several sources. Cabinet members, like the ones identified as Cabinet Secretary numbers 1, 2, and 3, they noticed their access just got smaller and smaller over 2023 into 2024.
Getting filtered information, or just not seeing him.
Both, often getting information filtered through aides or going months without actually seeing him in person.
And Cabinet Secretary number 3's account was particularly vivid.
It was. Describing being kept at bay from October 2023 onwards, calling it a weird period.
And being shocked at a rare meeting.
Yes, shocked by how Biden acted, using terms like disoriented, out of it, his mouth agape. And Cabinet Secretary number 2 added another observation. Biden had maybe 4 to 6 good hours a day.
Only 4 to 6?
That was their observation, noting his guard was down when tired. And this secretary believed aides had their own agenda, maybe not wanting contradictory information to reach the president.
So it sounds like there was a real sense among some, maybe in this third group or even the second, that aides were actively shielding the president.
The sources describe it that way, yes. That aides shielded him in every meeting, wanted to keep him happy, and even avoided telling him bad news, including, potentially, about his own deterioration.
And there was a question posed internally, recorded in these notes.
Yeah. Why didn't you go to him and say something?
That question really hangs there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What does this reveal about, the flow of information? Dissent in a place like the White House.
Well, it strongly suggests, as these sources portray it, that these differing perspectives on a leader's abilities, maybe combined with a protective instinct, can create real barriers to crucial conversations, maybe even distorting the information that actually reaches the top.
And these internal dynamics, these worries, they played out against the backdrop of specific events, right? Public and private moments where Biden's condition, according to these sources, became a noticeable issue.
Exactly. Let's look at a few key incidents these notes highlight. They're pretty detailed.
Okay, first up, the Ukraine meeting, January 17, 2024. The official White House readout sounded positive, right? Forceful case for aid.
That's what the official statement said, yeah. Forceful case. But accounts from House Democrats who were actually in the room, well, they painted a drastically different picture.
How different?
Calling it a disaster, even a shit show.
Shit show. Wow. Okay, what did they observe specifically?
They described Biden listlessly reading bullet points, being difficult to hear, stumbling over words, stopping abruptly, trailing off, and repeatedly deferring to Jake Sullivan and Avril Haines for the actual answers.
So not making a strong case himself.
One source said he was clearly not capable of making a strong, forceful argument for that vital aid package.
Was there any moment of clarity mentioned?
There was one observation, yeah. An attendee noted a flicker of hope when Mitch McConnell started talking. Biden seemed to woken up then, engaged briefly.
But overall, the impression was deeply concerning for them.
Yes. One House Democrat felt this meeting actually contributed to Republicans slow-walking the Ukraine aid. It gave them an excuse, basically, that Biden hasn't made a case, which this Democrat admitted they weren't really wrong about.
And Speaker Mike Johnson also found him hard to hear.
Difficult to hear and disconcerting, according to the sources.
Okay, another incident detailed here, a Roe v. Wade meeting. Also January 2024. This account comes from a senior administration official.
Correct. This official described a weak, slurry presentation initially, reading from a teleprompter. But then, in the private meeting afterwards...
Things got worse.
Reportedly, yes. He mixed up Mayorkas and Becerra, confused Texas and Alabama when discussing the abortion issue, was barely audible, swallowing his words.
And the official's reaction.
They left shaken, reportedly called the White House the next day, told a colleague, "I don't get how this guy can do any campaigning." And later, looking back, that official blamed the inner circle and what they saw as Biden's utter and total hubris for not stepping aside.
Then there was the decision to skip the Super Bowl interview. February 11, 2024. A tradition most presidents do.
Right. And while the CBS offer itself was limited just 3 minutes, pre-game it certainly looked to some, according to these materials, like the White House was avoiding exposure, maybe due to diminished capacity concerns.
But the sources also point to another, maybe more immediate reason.
Yes, the timing. The Robert Hur report on the classified documents was expected to drop literally any minute.
Yeah. So the interview would have been all about that.
Exactly. Before a massive national audience. The White House reportedly wanted to avoid that scenario at all costs.
Okay, so these are really detailed accounts from people who were there. offering this specific window into perceived difficulties. What do these moments suggest about the presidency itself, beyond just campaigning?
Well, these sources use them to really highlight how crucial clear communication, presence, mental acuity are for the actual job, and how perceived deficits, like in these incidents, can actually have real-world impacts, like potentially that delay in Ukraine aid.
Which brings us directly to the Robert Hur report itself, a huge moment. And as the sources detail, it caused this major political firestorm, even though it cleared the president of criminal charges.
Right, it's a paradox. Cleared but explosive. So the report had three main findings, according to these materials.
Let's break them down first.
First, it found evidence Biden willfully retained and disclosed classified materials after he was vice president. Yes. The sources note Hur drew distinctions from the Trump case, but also pointedly quoted Biden's own past comment about unsecured documents being totally irresponsible and basically said, that applies to you too.
Okay, so willfully retained, but point two, no criminal charges.
Correct. No charges warranted. And then point three, the flashpoint. Hur's explanation for why no charges.
Which was?
Prosecutors believed, based on their interviews with Biden, that a jury would likely see him as, and this is the direct quote, a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory.
Oof. That's the line that caused the explosion.
Absolutely. And it was presented as a pragmatic calculation. Could they actually win a conviction, given how a jury might perceive him?
And the report cited specific examples of memory lapses to back that up.
Yes. It noted significant limitations even back in the 2017 tapes with his ghostwriter, Swanitzer, where he struggled to remember things. And it explicitly stated his memory was worse in the fall 2023 interviews with Hur's team.
What kind of example?
Things like difficulty recalling basic timelines of his own vice presidency, like when did it start, when did it end, within years.
And the Beau Biden example.
Yes, the report included what Hur called the uncomfortable but accurate assessment that Biden did not remember, even within several years, when his son Beau died.
Just incredibly controversial. Now, the sources also mention how some career prosecutors reacted internally to the report.
Yeah, this is interesting. According to these materials, some career prosecutors read it and thought, holy crap, the president clearly broke the law, the same law Jack Smith is going after Trump for breaking.
Really?
They reportedly pointed specifically to an audio tape Hur had as key evidence of willfulness.
So one view inside the DOJ was that the law was broken. But the report still cleared him. Team Biden, though, their fury seemed aimed squarely at Hur's description of his memory, not the document stuff.
Precisely. There are letters to Hur and Garland detailed in the sources claimed parts of the report violate Department of Justice policy and practice. They called it pejoratively characterizing uncharged conduct.
But the main target was the memory stuff.
Laser focused.
Yeah.
The multiple denigrating statements about President Biden's memory, calling them uncalled for and unfounded with no law enforcement purpose.
And White House staff were pushing the DOJ hard behind the scenes, trying to get it changed.
Ed Siskel, the White House counsel, according to the sources, repeatedly called DOJ leadership, implicitly arguing for those passages about memory to be edited out before it went public.
Wow.
There was reportedly spreading anger directed at Deputy AG Lisa Monaco for not, protecting Biden by intervening. The sources found it confounding. Why push so hard to remove comments about age before release, given the potential scandal of doing so, plus legal obligations? Some wondered if they were trying to quash the whole report.
But Attorney General Merrick Garland, he held firm.
He did, according to these accounts, stood by his pledge to make the report public, consistent with DOJ policy he himself helped write. He disagreed with the White House arguments.
How so?
Garland saw Hur's reasoning about memory as consistent with DOJ standards and absolutely essential to explain the decision not to prosecute. It wasn't gratuitous, in Garland's view. It was the essence of Hur's decision.
So the report comes out, unedited in that respect, and the White House communication strategy then shifted.
To something pretty aggressive, described in the sources as a plan to essentially slime Hur as an unprofessional right-wing hack, and Garland as weak and essentially fired.
Essentially fired.
Oh, what?
It's intense language. And Vice President Harris weighed in publicly, too.
She did. Called Hur's comments gratuitous, inaccurate, and inappropriate. Said they were clearly politically motivated, lacked integrity. Other Democrats, like Eric Holder, echoed this, tweeting the remarks were gratuitous, inconsistent with DOJ traditions.
And media allies followed suit.
Right. MSNBC discussed ageism. The New Republic argued news outlets reporting on the memory part were rewarding her's bad faith, basically amplifying the wrong part of the story.
Then came that Politico leak, February 10th, right before the full report was out.
Yes. This leak said 2 people close to the president claimed Biden thought Garland hadn't done enough, should have demanded edits, and didn't expect Garland to stay on for a second term.
How is that viewed inside DOJ?
To Garland's allies and career attorneys, according to the sources, it looked like publicly firing Garland for behaving ethically, using media pressure on the department. Very distressing, especially after the Trump years.
But despite all this public and private pressure, Garland's personal view of her didn't change.
The sources report Garland saw her as a straight arrow, someone who treated Biden respectfully, whose conclusions were within legal bounds. The idea her was some political actor was, quote, ridiculous to Garland.
And interestingly, despite the public outrage from the White House, privately,
according to these notes, some senior White House officials who initially objected later acknowledged that what Hur said about Biden's demeanor in the interviews was actually true.
That's a really key detail from these sources. Some privately admitted it was accurate. What about Biden's claim later that Hur brought up Beau's death in the interview?
The sources recount Hur himself was stunned by that claim because it was false. Hur hadn't brought it up. Biden had. But Hur reportedly refused to push back publicly, sticking to DOJ practice, didn't want to debate the president in the press.
The White House also had a strategy for releasing the actual interview transcripts, didn't they?
They did. The sources note they gave embargoed copies to friendlier journalists first, before the public release.
Why? What was the hope?
Hoping that the partisan coverage of Hur's upcoming congressional hearing would sort of subsume or distract from the actual details in the transcripts, the rambling answers, the memory lapses.
And when Hur did testify in March,
he got, as the sources put it, pummeled by both sides. Republicans attacked him for not charging Biden, calling him part of the Praetorian Guard protecting the elites. Democrats argued he went too far on the memory assessment.
And Hur's defense.
Consistent with Garland's view described earlier. His assessment was necessary and accurate and fair. It reflected what he believed the evidence showed and, crucially, how jurors would likely perceive the president.
The sources also mentioned the professional fallout for Hur himself.
Yeah, described as being roundly vilified and apparently struggling to find work afterward.
So you really have to ask yourself, how did a report that cleared the president of criminal charges create such an immense political firestorm?
It's a great question, and these sources use this saga to really highlight that intersection, right? Legal processes, political strategy, public perception, all colliding in this highly charged environment.
It seems the report's specific language about memory, even if legally necessary, as Hur and Garland argued, it didn't just state a fact. It tapped into and validated existing anxieties.
And sparked this immediate, aggressive political defense aimed squarely at discrediting the messenger, Hur, as these sources describe it.
And these concerns about fitness, they weren't just confined to legal reports or, private meetings. They constantly played out against the backdrop of medical evaluations, public appearances, private observations.
Exactly, as detailed right here in these sources.
The last medical exam, February 28, 2024. That took on extra importance right after the Hur report dropped, didn't it?
It really did. And the sources reveal some fascinating internal discussions around it, like potentially putting Biden in a wheelchair after the election due to his physical deterioration, that halting walk.
Seriously, a wheelchair discussion.
Yes, and Doc O'Connor, his physician, reportedly privately noted the risk of needing one after a bad fall.
And the explanations for his gait, they seem to shift over time, according to these notes.
Yes. O'Connor had consistently cited medical reasons, like spinal arthritis, but then new, maybe more politically palatable explanations emerged internally, like blaming his refusal to wear a boot for a healed fracture, which reportedly contradicted O'Connor's earlier statements that the fracture was fully healed.
What about a cognitive exam? Was that seriously considered?
Political advisors definitely considered it, to try and blunt questions about his capacity, but the sources say O'Connor, the doctor, pushed back.
On what grounds?
Saying that medically, science didn't require it. He saw the president frequently, he argued, and would initiate one if he saw a reason for concern.
So the advisors decided against it.
Ultimately, yes, feeling kind of boxed in by their own public rhetoric that he was sharp. Plus, fearing the unknown results and believing critics wouldn't be satisfied anyway. Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre's public line was simply, he passes a cognitive test every day.
But the sources also point to memory lapses in public remarks, before the Her report even came out. It wasn't totally new.
No, not at all. Citing examples like mixing up former German Chancellor Helmut Kohl with Angela Merkel, or former French President François Mitterrand with Emmanuel Macron.
And the White House transcribers had a system for that.
The notes mention they reportedly used the strike-through feature frequently in official transcripts because such errors in public remarks were happening often.
Okay, so Biden's public response after the Her report, that press conference on February 8th, that was a really key moment.
It was huge. Sources describe a push from Hunter and his uncle Val for the president to fight back, in person.
And how did it go?
He reportedly showed real anger at the report's memory language. He misrepresented the facts about the Beau question, snapped at a reporter, gave a confusing answer comparing polling to press judgment, and then famously mixed up Egyptian President el-Sisi with the president of Mexico while talking about Gaza aid.
And it was short, right?
Very brief, just 12 minutes.
Okay, so some concerning public moments there. But then comes the State of the Union address, March 7th, presented almost as a, quote, de facto acuity test.
Exactly. High stakes. The sources describe intense preparation at Camp David, even bringing him special tea for his weak voice.
And the result?
Reportedly a fiery, energetic speech, one that seemed, at least initially, to quiet his doubters.
There were examples of him being sharp, ad-libbing.
Yes, specific examples noted of his clever and nimble ad-libs, responding directly to Republicans heckling him.
And the immediate reaction from Democrats, from the media, was very positive.
Overwhelmingly positive, yes. Quotes like, "You were on fire." Articles asking, "Has anyone seen Sleepy Joe Biden?" It was seen by many as proof he was still sharp.
BT, and there's always a but, in these sources. They immediately contrast this public triumph with private observations right after the speech.
This is where the picture gets really complicated. Congressman Mike Quigley reportedly observed Biden immediately after the speech, noting his frailty, his soft, breathy voice, his darting eyes, said it reminded him of his own aging father.
So, totally different impression up close.
And then hours later, back at the White House, aides noted the return of what they called old Biden, giving a rambling rah-rah speech to senior staff, the energy from the SATU apparently gone.
And the East Room Youth Program event also showed this stark difference between the TV image and the person in the room.
Yes, according to these accounts, he reportedly launched into a confusing story, then launched into others repeatedly. It was hard to hear. Aides, even his granddaughter, tried to gently usher him away.
How do people there react?
A student quoted felt a strange pang of surprise, seeing him as strikingly human, but maybe not quite presidential in that moment.
And the aides, how did they see it?
It varied. Some longer-tenured aides reportedly shrugged it off as just normal Biden rambling, but others, those with less regular access, were reportedly disturbed, thinking things like, "This isn't going to work, this is crazy."
And even at fundraisers, these kinds of observations kept cropping up.
According to the sources, yes. At an April fundraiser, Bill Daley, former Obama chief of staff, was reportedly shocked to see a teleprompter being used for just casual remarks to a small group, maybe 50 people. And the president left immediately after speaking.
And others there felt similarly.
A younger couple also reportedly expressed shock to Daley afterwards at Biden's feeble appearance.
It really paints this picture of two different perceptions, doesn't it? The carefully managed public figure versus the private reality observed by those closer to him.
Absolutely.
So how do these contrasting accounts, the successful public performances like the SOTU versus these concerning private observations, how do they illustrate the challenges of assessing a leader's fitness, especially when political staging is so involved?
Well, these sources use these moments to highlight that significant gap, right, between a tightly controlled performance, often designed for TV, and the more spontaneous private interactions where perceived deficits might become much more apparent to those present.
And adding another layer of really intense pressure, one that sources directly tied to observations of deterioration, was the impact of Hunter Biden's legal troubles.
Yeah, this looms large in the background of this period. Some close to the president reportedly tied his stages of deterioration, as they put it, specifically to moments of intense stress related to Hunter.
Like when?
Citing the plea deal falling apart in July 2023 and then the gun trial itself in June 2024 as these precipitous moments.
And the sources described the family presence at that trial as significant.
Oh, yeah. Jill, Val, Jimmy, Ashley, practically the whole close family reportedly there, watching as their family's darkest secrets were aired in open court.
And it wasn't just external scrutiny. The DOJ itself.
Biden's own Justice Department, the sources note, compelled family members to testify against Hunter, including Beau's widow, Hallie, and Hunter's ex-wife, Kathleen.
And Hunter's daughter Naomi's testimony. That was particularly difficult.
Reportedly, yes. Hunter's own team called her. But then the cross-examination was brutal. Prosecutors read text messages contradicting her testimony, grilled her about interactions with a dealer named Frankie. She became visibly upset, voice cracking, holding back tears. Just awful to watch, apparently.
How did top aides view the impact of all this on the president?
They saw it, according to the sources, as something that would inevitably exact a toll, cause real psychic damage to the president and the family.
And there was also this perspective among some aides about Biden's own role in Hunter's struggles.
Yes, the view among some aides captured in these notes was that Hunter had manipulated his father's blind love, and that Biden struggled immensely to say no to Hunter, becoming, in the words of some, Hunter's chief enabler.
And the president himself offered to testify at the trial.
Repeatedly, according to the sources, even the weekend right before it started, which others saw as completely unprecedented for a sitting president and carrying enormous risks. Jill also reportedly offered to testify, though her testimony wouldn't have been as central.
The sources really don't shy away from the family melodrama aspect revealed in court.
No, they delve into details like Hunter's affair with Beau's widow, Hallie, introducing her to crack cocaine, playing excerpts from Hunter's own memoir audiobook in court, which reportedly made his sister Ashley cry. It was raw.
And the verdict itself. Was it expected?
Yeah. Hunter's legal team reportedly knew acquittal was a long shot. Best hope was maybe a hung jury. Given the facts, the judge's instructions, witnesses they couldn't call. So the guilty verdict on all three counts wasn't a total surprise to them. It came quickly, too, reportedly, before Jill and Val could even get back to the courthouse.
How did Hunter take it?
Stoically, according to the reports.
And President Biden's reaction?
His immediate reaction, described here, was that impromptu trip to Wilmington, same day as the verdict. Shared a tight embrace with Hunter on the tarmac. Reportedly wanted Hunter to know he was still proud of him.
But the legal jeopardy wasn't over, was it?
Not by a long shot. The looming tax trial in September was seen as potentially much tawdrier.
How so?
Involving allegations beyond just late taxes. Cashing in on the family name, hiding money from the government and his ex-wife, spending lavishly on drugs, escorts, luxury items, and the potential for subpoenaing all the adult children again. Hunter reportedly felt this case was just designed to humiliate the family further.
A fourth cabinet secretary's view really captured the impact of the gun convictions starkly.
Yes, they viewed it as a 500-pound weight dropping on the president's head, linking it directly to what they saw as precipitous moments of decline during all the turmoil surrounding Hunter.
The sources emphasize Biden's intense focus on this.
Yes, his preoccupation with Hunter's fate. His deep fear, apparently, of losing a third child after losing Beau and his infant daughter Naomi years before.
Yet, despite this immense personal stress, the job goes on.
Right. Biden flew to the G7 summit in Italy the very next day after the verdict, then straight on to that big LA fundraiser.
So you think about this. How might immense personal stress, family turmoil like this, intersect with the demands of the presidency? A high-stakes campaign.
Well, these sources really use Hunter's trial and its clear impact on the president to highlight those profound personal burdens carried by anyone in the highest office, and how, according to these specific accounts, they can spill over, potentially affect perceived capacity of focus during really critical political periods.
And these cumulative pressures, these observations, they all seem to culminate in the high-stakes world of fundraising, especially with observations from some very high-profile figures, as described in these sources.
Absolutely. Starting with Jeffrey Katzenberg, longtime top Democratic fundraiser, reportedly absolutely dedicated to Biden's 2024 run, not wanting anything for himself in return, just wanted Biden to win.
And Katzenberg had a specific message he was trying to push within the campaign.
Yes. I want Joe Biden back. That was his phrase, according to the sources. He felt the Joe Biden people elected, that relatable retail politician, had kind of disappeared, now only seen as the president behind a podium. Stiff.
And he even tried to bring in Hollywood help for this.
He did. Tried to fix what he saw as communication struggles. Reportedly even got Steven Spielberg involved for advice on lighting, microphones for events, hoping maybe a little Hollywood magic could help ease those age concerns, make him look better.
And Katzenberg was organizing these massive fundraisers.
Record-breaking ones. $26 million in March, aiming for another record, $30 million in June, leading up to that huge Los Angeles fundraiser on June 15th.
The L.A. fundraiser.
Mm.
That sounds like a really pivotal event in these sources. You had George Clooney, Julia Roberts, Jimmy Kimmel, Barack Obama all there.
Huge names. And the sources highlight the crazy travel schedules people like Clooney and Roberts endured just to be there, to show support.
But George Clooney's observations when Biden actually arrived, they're particularly striking in these materials.
They really are. Clooney described the president hobbling out of the plane, an aide guiding him, appearing in Clooney's eyes severely diminished, like he'd aged a decade just since Clooney saw him in 2022.
And another VIP there had a similar reaction.
Yes, another Hollywood VIP present reportedly called it like watching someone who was not alive, describing the sight as startling and awful.
Like watching someone who was not alive. Just a brutal description. And there was that specific moment involving Clooney himself, where Biden didn't recognize him.
Yes, according to the sources, Biden was apparently just repeatedly saying, "Thank you for being here," and an aide had to step in and remind him who Clooney was, saying things like, "You know George," and then specifically, "George Clooney." Biden's recognition seemed delayed. "Oh, yeah. Hi, George."
Wow. And Clooney's reaction to that moment.
He was reportedly shaken to his core, realizing, as he saw it, the problem went way beyond just a stiff walk. It was much graver. The sources capture him thinking, essentially, this was the president of the United States.
And other high-dollar donors there had similar takeaways.
Yes, some described Biden as seeming slow and almost catatonic, mentioning what they called brain freezes, clear signs of a mental slide, reportedly terrifying some donors who were writing big checks.
Barack Obama's observations are also detailed here. What did he notice?
Obama reportedly noted Biden was barely audible sometimes, would trail off incoherently. Obama found himself often stepping in, sort of presiding over conversations or even finishing Biden's sentences for him.
Did Obama have an explanation for it?
Initially, he reportedly put it down to the brutal itinerary. Biden had just completed D-Day in France, G7 in Italy, a hunter's trial verdict. Just exhausted. But he came to realize, according to these notes, that scheduling was not the fundamental problem. He apparently started protectively questioning Biden's demanding schedule after that.
Jon Favreau, Obama's former speechwriter, he also had a really striking comparison, didn't he?
Yeah, his account highlights a dramatic perceived change over time. He described seeing Biden back in December 2022 as sharp and garrulous. But then, during an April 2024 White House visit, completely different.
How different?
Biden seemed to have aged 50 years and 16 months, was incoherent, told rambling stories, even repeated one specific story twice during their meeting, left Favreau deeply disturbed. A staffer reportedly just offered the excuse that Biden was just tired.
So even on the fundraiser stage itself, with all the Hollywood magic, Obama, Kimmel helping out, there were still concerns among attendees.
According to the sources, yes. Some were still concerned by Biden's perceived diminishment, his quiet and frail presentation, his apparent inability to make a really strong, convincing sales pitch to the donors. His answer seemed confusing to some.
And the moment at the very end of the show.
Mm-hmm.
That seemed to crystallize these concerns for a lot of people present.
It really did. Kimmel and Obama walk off stage. Biden just stands there, reportedly staring blankly into the crowd for several seconds. Obama then walks back, takes his arm, and guides him backstage.
How is that explained?
Well, Obama reportedly explained later he just wanted to get off stage but didn't want to leave Biden standing there alone. The White House, meanwhile, claimed Biden was simply basking in the applause and dismissed video clips of the moment as cheap fakes.
But attendees saw something different, like Congresswoman Annie Kuster.
Yes, Custer reportedly saw it as him clearly looking like he doesn't know where he's supposed to go. Said it reminded her of an aging grandparent. Made her worry what's going to happen next. Custer reportedly concluded right then that Biden couldn't make it through the campaign.
And Emily Favreau, John's wife, was also there.
Yes, and she reportedly found the whole event a complete disaster.
So what happens? When the immense demands of campaigning needing energy, sharpness, that personal connection meet these kinds of private observations of decline, as described in these sources, how does public perception clash with that behind-the-scenes reality?
This section really suggests that even with the most careful staging, even with high-profile allies running interference, those private concerns can become undeniable, especially during high-stakes public moments, and particularly when observed by people who knew the person well previously and see a stark difference.
And these observations from fundraisers, other events, they fed directly into the campaign's internal world, right? The world of polls, strategy, and that high-stakes road toward the June debate.
Absolutely. It all starts to converge here.
For the campaign pollsters, the sources describe this period as often being a joyless, unpleasant experience. Why?
Well, yeah. Initial polls showed Biden down, but, theoretically fixable. But the race proved remarkably static. The numbers just barely moved, no matter what happened. Good news, bad news, didn't matter much.
Voters had made up their minds. Things were baked in.
That's how the pollster saw it. Voters knew both candidates extremely well. Opinions were pretty fixed.
And the campaign had this core assumption about getting 2020 voters back. That turned out to be flawed.
According to the pollsters cited right here, yes. The campaign brass assumed that 2020 Biden voters who were holding back, maybe flirting with third parties or saying undecided, would just naturally migrate back closer to the election.
But the data didn't support that.
The pollsters noted internally there was no data supporting this assumption. And worse, Trump seemed to be doing better with new voters coming into the electorate.
And the pollsters knew the real reasons voters were holding back from Biden.
Oh, absolutely. They had the actual data, as one source bluntly put it. It wasn't complicated. Age and inflation. Those were the top two concerns by far.
And on inflation, the sources reveal a major messaging disconnect. A failure, according to the pollsters.
Yes. The pollsters knew from their data that Biden needed to acknowledge prices were too high, acknowledge the pain voters felt. But Donilon and others reportedly refused to allow that message.
On instruction from Biden himself.
That's what the sources indicate. Biden feared acknowledging inflation would overshadow everything else positive they wanted to talk about.
How did the pollsters see that refusal?
As cognitive dissonance. As insulting voters who knew they were struggling. They felt the campaign sounded like it was in fantasy land, telling people the economy was great when their grocery bills were sky high.
The contrast with Obama in 2012.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Obama acknowledged the economic pain voters felt then. The Bidenomics message, especially after that peak inflation period, just wasn't landing. Voters felt like they lived on a different planet than the campaign messaging.
Okay, so inflation was one huge hurdle, and the other was age.
Right. Age was a top concern from the very beginning. Voters saw Biden as too old, often using, frankly, denigrating terms. And crucially, they didn't see Trump the same way, despite their similar ages.
Focus groups confirmed this.
Yes. Pollster Jeff Binder's focus groups showed voters didn't buy the energetic clips, like the State of the Union, as real proof of fitness. They'd say, oh, it's the teleprompter, or he had notes, or even float theories about stimulants. The underlying worry remained about international crises, the tolls of aging on a president.
And the campaign actually limited the pollsters' ability to even ask about these core concerns directly.
According to the sources, yes. Pollsters wanted to dig deeper, ask more directly about age and fitness, but were only allowed to approach only the outer circle of those sensitive questions.
But the underlying data was clear, like that Michigan poll.
Starkly clear. An early May Michigan poll, top concern by far. Mental fitness, 38%. Second place. Inflation, 23%. Everything else, way behind.
So the pollsters believed that Bidenland, the inner circle, they knew age was a massive problem. But what was their hope?
The hope, as the pollsters perceived it, was that age would somehow become secondary, that the threat of Trump would ultimately overshadow it. And they were pinning those hopes on a big moment, the debate, hoping that would fix it.
Which brings us right to the debate decision itself.
Yeah.
How did that come about? Was it unanimous?
Oh, hotly debated internally, according to these notes. Ron Klain, former chief of staff, felt Biden absolutely had to debate, prove he could do it. Steve Ricchetti, another top advisor, was apparently skeptical, saw limited impact, didn't like the Trumpiness of the proposed formats.
And it needed done.
She reportedly changed her mind after the Her report came out. Initially, maybe hesitant, but then agreed. He had to debate to directly confront the fitness questions.
And Jen O'Malley Dillon, the campaign chair, she pushed for that unprecedented early June date. Why so early?
Yes, her reasoning, according to the sources, was purely strategic. An early debate would boost fundraising. It would frame the race immediately as a clear choice between Biden and Trump. And, crucially, it allowed time to recover politically if the debate went poorly.
Aides acknowledged the enormous risk involved, though.
They absolutely did. It was seen as a massive gamble, a high-stakes scenario requiring a rapid shift into intense debate prep. And there was this admission, captured in these notes, that Biden was dramatically worse in the 2024 debate prep sessions compared to previous campaigns, which is generally less sharp, less focused. There was even an internal admission, a sort of dark joke of grading him on a curve every day.
Yet, despite all this risk, Donilon remained confident.
Outwardly, yes. Reportedly telling the team something like, he's going to get elected again with people thinking he's too old. Just power through it.
Okay, so the debate prep itself, at Camp David, sounds challenging based on these sources.
Extremely challenging. Biden reportedly arrived having done little preparation beforehand, was described as rusty and exhausted, sleeping and napping frequently between the practice sessions.
And sessions themselves.
Intense, but the time was limited. His performance during prep reportedly ranged wildly from bad to passable. His voice was often hard to hear, delivery halting, answers sometimes all over the place. Advisors specifically noted his mouth hanging agape at times, his voice getting raspier during the practice debates.
Ron Klain had a theory about why prep was so difficult this time, related to the previous year.
Yes, Klain reportedly believed Biden had been too locked down in 2023, not engaged enough in domestic politics, focused heavily on Ukraine, infrastructure projects, bridges. Klain apparently wondered if Biden was running for president of Europe or president of the United States.
His communication skills suffered from lack of practice.
That was Klain's view. They deteriorated from lack of practice, from not embracing those performative aspects of the presidency daily. Plus, Klain felt Biden had this mindset that Trump would just defeat himself, which maybe lessened the perceived urgency for intense preparation early on.
And the prep right before the debate was further undermined by illness.
Yes, Biden reportedly caught a cold, had voice issues, needed extra rest, which further narrowed those already tight prep windows right before the debate night.
Yet, despite all these challenges, the rustiness, the exhaustion, the illness, the bad to passable prep performance, the team reportedly left Camp David feeling good.
Bizarrely, yes. The belief, or maybe the hope, was that Biden is a game day performer, that he had been bad in prep before, but always rose to the occasion on the actual stage. Katzenberg reportedly echoed this sentiment as they left Camp David, saying something like, okay, well, our guy is a game day performer, fingers crossed.
And just weeks before that debate, the Wall Street Journal published that big story. Behind closed doors, Biden shows signs of slipping.
Right. Citing sources on that difficult Ukraine meeting, Speaker Johnson's concerns, and noting even some Democrats said he showed his age in private.
And the Biden team's reaction was aggressive.
Extremely aggressive, attacked it hard, argued it relied solely on Republicans. Spokesperson Ben LeBolt even reportedly insinuated Rupert Murdoch personally ordered the story. The sources here, though, state the story's origins were just mundane reporting, gathering string from various sources over time.
Deputy Press Secretary Andrew Bates also pushed back hard.
Yes, according to these materials, he aggressively denied the reporting. Reportedly, sometimes at the behest of senior staff who told him to deny things they themselves knew were true, even though Bates and the press team rarely saw the president directly themselves.
And Ricchetti made a call.
Steve Ricchetti also reportedly called a reporter at another outlet who was hearing similar concerns from aides, talked off the record to dispute it. A move that reporter apparently felt was designed to portray her as a liar if she published her own story.
The D-Day commemoration in Normandy, also in June, right before the debate, that seemed to make Biden's perceived frailty obvious to a global audience, according to these sources.
It really did. A House Democrat who was there was reportedly shocked by Biden's frailty compared to the actual elderly veterans present. There was that odd moment where he appeared to freeze while sitting down next to President Macron.
Congressman Seth Moulton had a strong reaction.
Yes, Moulton reportedly felt embarrassed as an American seeing what he perceived as an enfeebled U.S. president next to the energetic French leader. Biden was reportedly driven a short distance, the veterans walked, spoke very quietly. And according to Moulton, Biden didn't recognize him despite knowing him for years.
And Macron himself seemed embarrassed.
French President Macron was reportedly overheard saying he was gêné, which means embarrassed or uncomfortable.
An aide to another European leader also commented on the difference between scripted calls and real interactions.
Yes, this aide, who'd seen Biden needing guidance even back at the UN in 2022, said phone calls were okay because they were scripted, but longer conversations relying on, quote, thought process, that's when it was hard. Even staffers helping with a rare ABC interview in Normandy were reportedly alarmed by what they saw up close.
And right before the debate, at an immigration event, there was that notable teleprompter glitch.
Yes, he mumbled incoherently for about 3 seconds, just trailed off, which some physicians watching described as possibly neurological.
And Senator Michael Bennet had concerns about policy.
Colorado Senator Michael Bennet reportedly felt Biden's inability, perhaps due to limitations, to really mediate between different viewpoints within his own administration had led to an incoherent policy on immigration. Bennett wondered if Biden could still play that role of arbiter, like Obama or even Trump did, or if it was just staff sort of capitulating to different factions.
And a cabinet secretary agreed.
Yes, believing Biden's limitations actually gave aides more power, ironically. Bennett reportedly told his staffers after one interaction, "We're in trouble."
So you take all this together. The internal polling data showing age is a top concern. The strategic debates. These specific observations right up to the debate. How do the campaign's internal numbers and strategies clash with what people around the president were actually seeing and reporting?
It seems like a significant clash, doesn't it?
Yeah. And what is this reliance on one single debate, this one high-wire act, to somehow fix a fundamental voter concern like age?
Yeah.
What does that reveal about the campaign's central challenge?
Well, these sources really suggest a huge gap. A gap between the data-driven reality the pollsters were seeing age is a massive, persistent problem, and this almost hopeful, maybe even desperate, strategic reliance on one make-or-break performance. A reliance that perhaps ignored the compounding weight of all these external events, the family stress, and the consistent private observations of decline.
So the central tension described across all these sources, it really becomes crystal clear by the end here, doesn't it?
It does. The mounting concerns within Biden's own circles, his party, his staff, his donors about his age, his acuity, highlighted again and again by specific incidents like that Ukraine meeting, the Roe v. Wade meeting, the descriptions in the Her report.
All constantly clashing with the public image they wanted to project, clashing with the campaign's strategic needs, especially heading into that absolutely critical June 2024 debate.
It really was this confluence of factors captured in these materials. You had the internal White House dynamics, the different camps, public appearances being intensely scrutinized through this lens of fitness, the immense family stress from the Hunter Biden trial weighing on him.
Political strategy grappling with, frankly, terrible poll numbers on age. And poll data explicitly confirming age was a top voter concern. All of it just putting immense pressure on the president, on his whole campaign team, as they prepared for that pivotal debate moment.
So given the depth of these internal observations, these concerns described right here in these sources, and considering the strategic challenges the campaign faced heading into that debate, what does this all reveal about the nature of presidential fitness, political leadership in our modern era, where performance, perception, being constantly under that media